All right, let's dive into something pretty interesting today. Accounts receivable factoring. We've got a whole stack of articles here from Blue Barn Funding, and they specialize in this. It's not just marketing stuff, though, I gotta say.
No.
It's actually really interesting. We're going to use these articles to see how factoring actually works, and we'll take a look at how businesses across different industries use it to really, make things happen.
What I think is most important here is that even though, of course, these articles are from a company trying to, get you to use their services, they still offer a really good look at the kind of inner workings of this financial strategy. So whether or not you run a business yourself, or you're just interested in, the way that money makes the world go round, Mabel, understanding this it's a good thing.
Yeah. So imagine you're running a business. You've delivered your product or your service. You've sent an invoice, and that payment is, well, let's just say it's decided to take a little vacation, right? Factoring is basically like selling that invoice to another company, a third party, the factoring company, and you get a little less than the full value. They then give you the cash up front, and they handle getting the full amount from your customer.
Yeah. And what's really cool about this is that it gives you cash,
Yeah.
like right when you need it the most. The articles we have here point out that it can be a lifesaver for businesses, especially in industries where you have clients that are known to pay slowly. Those really long payment cycles. Think like manufacturers or government contractors even.
Oh, yeah. And speaking of government contractors, there's one article that really gets into like the whole dynamic of working with the government. Reliable customer, but a lot of paperwork. Huh?
Lots of paperwork.
They actually lay out the good and the bad. Even some of the more specific things, like all the hoops you had to jump through to get approved, or how payments can sometimes get delayed because of, well,
Yeah.
administrative processes.
Yeah. And this is where I think it gets really, really interesting. It forces you to really think about it. Yeah. Is it really worth it? I mean, yeah, government contracts are nice and stable, but you might have to deal with all that red tape. The articles kind of hint at this trade-off. You've got that steady revenue on the one hand, but you might have to deal with a much stricter system.
Definitely something to think about. It's not just about getting paid, right? It's about getting paid in a way that that really works for you, that matches up with, your business goals.
Yeah.
So going back to factoring in general, Blue Barn Funding really emphasizes how fast it is. We could be talking funding within a rec, sometimes even the same day you send the invoice. For businesses that are, working with tight margins, or if they suddenly have to deal with unexpected expenses, that speed can be a total game changer.
Well, yeah, for sure. And that speed is especially important for new companies, startups, and also for businesses in industries that move really quickly, like the tech world, for example. Think about a SaaS company. They often have to spend a lot of money up front, on development and marketing. But then they depend on people paying those subscriptions every month, which can take a while to actually, turn into real money. And so factoring can help bridge that gap. It can give them the money they need to keep innovating and doing their thing without having to constantly worry about, having enough cash on hand.
Yeah, and it's not just tech companies either. The articles talk about how medical practices benefit too, dealing with insurance companies and government healthcare programs. It's notoriously slow, right?
The worst.
And that can put a real strain on a practice.
Exactly.
Like, can they actually provide quality care to patients if they're always struggling to, make ends meet? Factoring helps with that. It keeps things stable. They can pay their staff. They can invest in the equipment they need. And ultimately, they can really focus on what matters, taking care of their patients.
Yeah, absolutely. What I find really interesting here is that it doesn't really matter what industry you're in. The need for steady cash flow is like a universal thing, whether you're making software or providing healthcare or even fulfilling a government contract. That challenge of making sure you have the money to operate and grow your business. It's the same everywhere.
It's like they're all playing the same game, just with slightly different rule books.
Exactly. And factoring, it kind of, it adapts to those different rules. Speaking of different rules, one thing that the articles do mention is that there can be downsides to factoring, specifically when it comes to the fees and discount rates involved. They don't really go into a lot of detail, but it's definitely something that's worth taking a closer look at, because you really need to understand the true cost before you make any, financial decisions.
For sure. It's like anything else. There are always trade-offs.
Yeah.
But even with those trade-offs, I think the articles make a really good case for factoring. They even talk about a benefit that people often overlook. The fact that the factoring company actually takes over collecting the money. So you can free up your own internal resources and focus on, the core stuff.
Oh, for sure. That's a huge point, especially for smaller businesses
Mm.
or for businesses that just don't have a lot of staff. Time is money, you know?
Mhm.
And so if they can outsource that collections process, well, they can save money on overhead costs. They don't have to worry about as much administrative stuff, and they can just spend more time and energy on what they do best.
It's almost like having a silent partner
Yeah.
to help take care of the really heavy financial stuff. But like you said, those fees and rates, they
Yeah.
definitely need to be looked at carefully, because it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of getting cash quickly and not think about the longer term impact on your finances.
Right. And that's actually a really important point because remember, these articles are coming from a company that's literally selling these services. So it's important to keep that in mind. And remember that there's always, another side to the story.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. Always do your own research. Compare different companies. Really weigh the good and the bad before making any decisions.
Absolutely. You've got to empower yourself by learning as much as you can so you can make those informed choices that actually match your business needs and your goals.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're trying to do here, give you the information you need so you can navigate this whole world of business financing. Now, before we move on, let's take a closer look at how factoring actually plays out in different industries. Starting with those SaaS companies that we mentioned earlier, what are some of the unique challenges they face that make factoring so appealing?
Yeah, SaaS companies are, they're fascinating, really. They're built on, constant innovation, always evolving. But traditional lenders, they often have a hard time really figuring out how to, assess their value.
Yeah.
And that's where factoring can be, it can be a really good solution because it's so much more agile.
Yeah, it's almost like they're speaking two completely different languages, right? Traditional financing, it wants to see, physical assets, predictable revenue.
Right.
But it's all about future potential. And those recurring subscriptions.
Exactly. And the Blue Barn Funding articles, they actually highlight that that disconnect. They talk about how SaaS companies often, they don't have a lot of, operating history. Their profits might be pretty small.
Yeah.
Especially in the early stages. And they might not have a lot of physical assets to, use as collateral. So traditional lenders, they tend to see them as risky.
Yeah. But factoring kind of flips that whole thing on its head, right? Instead of looking at the SaaS company itself, they're looking at the creditworthiness of their clients.
Yeah.
So if those clients are good, the factoring company is more likely to, approve the funding.
Yeah, the total shift.
Yeah.
And how they're looking at the whole thing. Suddenly those recurring subscriptions, which traditional lenders see as unpredictable, they become a good thing because they represent future revenue from reliable sources.
Yeah, and that brings us to another point that the articles make. Factoring isn't just a way to, fix cash flow problems. It can actually be a tool to help SaaS companies grow.
And what's really cool about that is it gives them the financial flexibility to jump on opportunities when they come up. So let's say a SaaS company, they land a huge new client, right? They need to scale up their infrastructure, maybe hire more developers, but that costs money up front.
Yeah.
Factoring can give them the money to do that.
Yeah.
Without, slowing them down.
So it's like giving them wings, right? They can fly higher and faster.
Exactly.
And the articles even go as far as to say that factoring can help SaaS companies get better deals with their suppliers.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that before.
So by showing that they have consistent cash flow, thanks to factoring, SaaS companies can negotiate better payment terms, which means lower expenses and a healthier bottom line.
It's like this ripple effect of positive financial impact.
Exactly. But okay, let's switch gears for a second and talk about those fees and discount rates. We mentioned them earlier. But can we give our listeners a more concrete example of how those costs might actually play out?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So let's say a SaaS company has a $10,000 invoice from a really good client, and they want to factor it, right? The factoring company might say, okay, we'll give you 80% upfront, which would be $8,000. Now, there's also going to be a factoring fee, maybe 2% of the invoice. So that's another $200.
So right off the bat, they're down $200, and we haven't even factored in the discount rate.
Right. The discount rate is basically the cost of using the factoring service. It's kind of like the interest that you're paying for that advance. And it can change depending on things like how trustworthy the client is, how big the invoice is, and what industry you're in. So let's just say, in this case, the discount rate is 1% per month if the client takes 30 days to pay. The total discount cost, would be $100.
So in the end, the SaaS company would get $7,700 out of that original $10,000. Pretty big chunk.
Yeah.
But they did get that money up front, which lets them, take care of immediate needs or invest in growing their business.
Exactly. It's a trade-off, but it can be a really good one, depending on, what the company needs. And there's another thing that the articles mention, recourse factoring.
Yeah. The what if the client doesn't pay scenario.
Exactly. So with recourse factoring, if the client doesn't pay the invoice, the factoring company can come back to the SaaS company and say, hey, you owe us this money. So the risk, it kind of shifts back to the SaaS company.
Yeah, that's definitely something to think about, especially if you're working with clients that maybe don't have the best payment history.
Yeah, for sure.
And it also highlights how important it is to choose a good factoring company.
Oh, absolutely.
You need to find a company that's, reputable, they have a good track record,
Yeah.
they're financially solid, and their practices are transparent.
Yeah, it's not just about getting the lowest rates. It's about finding a partner that you can trust to handle your invoices and to work with your clients in a way that's, professional and ethical.
It's like any other business relationship, right?
Totally.
You want to make sure that your values are aligned.
Exactly.
So let's talk about medical practices for a minute. The articles paint a pretty vivid picture of the cash flow problems they face. But they also talk about some interesting solutions through factoring.
Yeah, and what I find really interesting about medical factoring is it's almost like a whole separate thing within the larger world of factoring.
Right.
Because you've got all these third-party medical accounts receivable, and you have to navigate all those insurance regulations and understand the specific billing codes. It takes a lot of expertise. There are a lot of general factoring companies just don't have.
Yeah, the articles actually say that. Some traditional accounts receivable financing companies, they actually avoid the medical industry.
Oh, wow.
Because it's so complicated.
It's a high-stakes environment, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Accuracy and compliance are super important.
Yeah.
I mean, if you make a mistake in medical billing, it can have serious consequences.
Yeah.
So finding a factoring partner that really knows their stuff in the specific area is crucial.
It's almost like they need a translator, right, to bridge the gap between the language of medicine and the language of finance.
That's a great way to put it.
And it's not just about expertise either. It's about sensitivity. Medical practices are dealing with, people's health and well-being. So the factoring company needs to be able to handle those invoices and interact with clients in a way that's compassionate and understanding.
Right. They're not just numbers. They're real people who are going through potentially stressful situations.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that even though factoring is a financial tool, it still operates within a human context.
Totally.
And speaking of human context, let's go back to that government contracting stuff we were talking about.
Yeah.
The Blue Barn funding articles, they have some interesting things to say about this unique world, highlighting both the appeal and the challenges. It's funny, these Blue Barn funding articles, they're really pushing factoring, right? But they also end up highlighting all the challenges businesses face. When they're trying to work with the government, they talk about the really long procurement processes, the crazy competition to actually win contracts. And the possibility of those payment delays.
It's a tricky situation,
Yeah.
On the one hand, getting a government contract, it can be a really big deal. It's steady income, and it can even give your business like a boost in reputation. But on the other hand, all the paperwork and all the rules you have to follow, it can be really hard.
Yeah.
Especially for smaller companies.
They even use the phrase limited flexibility, which makes it sound like you're kind of stuck, signing up for a very specific way of doing things.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it might not be for everyone.
Right. It's really important to understand those limitations before before you get too deep into it. Like the articles mention, that government contracts often come with specific reporting requirements and quality control standards that you have to meet. And that can add a whole lot of administrative stuff, which can cost money.
Yeah, it's almost like you have another boss that you have to answer to. And what about those stringent requirements we keep talking about? What are some examples of those?
Well, imagine you're a construction company and you're bidding on a government contract to build a new bridge. The contract might tell you exactly what materials you have to use. And those materials might have to come from Specific vendors who have already been approved. It might also tell you what labor standards you have to follow. Maybe you have to use union labor, or make sure that all your workers have certain safety certifications. And then you might have environmental regulations, reporting deadlines, just a whole bunch of things that add complexity and cost to the project.
So it's not just about building a bridge anymore. It's about building a bridge in a very specific way.
Yeah.
And they're not going to let you stray from the plan.
Exactly. And while those requirements, they're there for a reason.
Yeah.
To make sure things are done right and everything's transparent. They can also make it really hard for businesses to even get into the game, especially if they don't have a lot of resources or experience.
It's a real trade-off. The stability of a government contract. It might sound great.
Oh, yeah.
But all those headaches and hidden costs, they can add up quickly.
Yeah, they can.
If you're not careful.
A good reminder that even those government contracts, which seem so secure,
Yeah.
they still come with risks. Like the articles mention, payments can be delayed because of,
Yeah.
bureaucracy.
Or budget problems. Like,
Waiting for a giant ship to turn around,
Yeah.
it takes forever.
Yeah.
And there's not much you can do about it. And that's where factoring can actually be really helpful, even for government contractors, because it gives them that cash flow right away, even though the payments are delayed.
Yeah.
So it can help them keep things running smoothly.
it's like a safety net, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about
You
it.
hit some turbulence,
Uh-huh.
but you're prepared.
Exactly. It gives you that cushion so you can focus on doing the work without having to worry about whether or not you're going to be able to, keep the lights on.
Yeah. So as we're wrapping up our deep dive here into accounts receivable factoring, I think we've learned a lot. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but it's definitely a versatile tool that businesses can adapt to different industries and different situations.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to look at all the nuances of this financing method. We've seen how it can help businesses that had to deal with clients who pay slowly. We've seen how it can help startups grow, how it can give stability to medical practices, and even how it can help mitigate the risks of government contract.
But I think the biggest takeaway is that it's all about making informed decisions. The Blue Barn funding articles, they were trying to sell us on factoring, right?
Yeah.
But they also reminded us that we need to look beyond the surface, to weigh the pros and cons, and to ultimately choose a path that aligns with our own business goals.
It's about being empowered by having the knowledge, understanding the true costs and the benefits, and then making choices that are going to lead to long-term success, not just, short-term gains.
And that's the power of knowledge, right? It gives us the tools to deal with all the complexities of the business world, to make good decisions, and to build a more stable and prosperous future for everyone.
It's been great talking about all this with you.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.